Welcome back to another Explainer, where we take these massive, complex historical shifts and break them down into insights you can actually use. Today, we're exploring one of history's absolute most fascinating paradigm shifts in leadership and statecraft. We're looking at Ashoka Empire growth, but, absolutely not in the way you might expect. We are tracking a dramatic, completely unprecedented evolution from the bloody conquests of the sword straight to the peaceful governance of Dhamma.
Okay, let's dive into this. Think about how we traditionally measure the growth of an empire, or even a modern nation. Throughout history, whether you're talking about Alexander the Great, Julius Caesar, Genghis Khan, growth was almost exclusively achieved through blood and iron. It's usually about borders, right? More land, more resources, a massively larger military. Conquering your neighbors was just the standard operating procedure for any ancient superpower. But the question we're exploring today completely challenges that very assumption. How do you grow an empire without drawing a sword? To understand how a ruler actually achieved this massive paradox in the ancient world, we have to look at what he started with.
Section 1. The Expanding Mauryan Empire.
To really set the stage here, Ashoka was born into a family business of aggressive territorial conquest. He didn't build this war machine from scratch. He inherited it. Just look at the lineage. In 322 BCE, his grandfather, Chandragupta, founded the Mauryan Empire through sheer military force, unifying huge swaths of the subcontinent. Then, right after that, in 297 BCE, his father, Bindusara, pushed those borders even further south, relentlessly conquering independent kingdoms. So, by the time Ashoka takes the throne around 268 BCE, he is taking the helm of an established, highly aggressive expansionist state whose entire economy and culture are built around war.
To give you a sense of the sheer scale we are talking about here, the early Mauryan Empire was a vast territory stretching all the way from modern-day Afghanistan in the west, completely across the subcontinent, to Bangladesh in the east. Imagine walking or taking a horse across modern Europe, literally from Portugal all the way over to Ukraine. That is the kind of logistical nightmare of communication and control we're dealing with. Controlling this massive landmass required an enormous, ruthless military apparatus. And initially, Ashoka did exactly what his ancestors did, and exactly what was expected of him. He used his formidable armies to maintain and expand that massive footprint with an iron fist.
Section 2. The Bloody Kalinga Turning Point. And this is where the story shifts, and the traditional model of imperial growth comes to an absolutely devastating climax. 100,000 plus. Take a second to really absorb that number. In 261 BCE, Ashoka launched a brutal military campaign to conquer Kalinga, which was a wealthy, strategically important region on the eastern coast of India. He won the territory, sure, but the human cost was staggering. Historical sources estimate that over 100,000 people were killed. And we aren't just talking about soldiers falling on a battlefield. Actually, scratch that. This was a civilian massacre. Families were totally decimated. Countless others were displaced, dying of famine and disease in the terrible aftermath. The devastation was absolute, literally turning the local rivers red with blood.
Now, historically, when a king wins a massive war like this, they throw a parade, they build a triumphal arch, they celebrate the whole shebang. But witnessing this horrific bloodshed firsthand triggered a profound personal crisis for Ashoka. It's an incredible anomaly in human history. A victorious emperor walks through a conquered bloody field, and instead of celebrating, he is utterly broken by it. As our source material notes, the extent of the devastation and agony prompted Ashoka to a deep self-examination. He realized that building an empire on top of mountains of corpses was just a hollow, repulsive victory. And this trauma ultimately led to his conversion to Buddhism and an absolutely shocking decision for the time: the total renunciation of violence.
Section 3. A New Growth Dhamma. And this brilliantly illustrates where Ashoka fundamentally redefines what it actually means to be a powerful state. During his early rule, the empire was defined by military conquest and retributive justice, using fear, violence, and severe punishment to maintain control and order. But in his later rule, he pivoted entirely to moral conquest and restorative justice. He adopted this policy of Dhamma. Now, Dhamma wasn't just a personal religion. It was a radical, empire-wide civic framework. It was a broad ethical code centered on compassion, nonviolence, mutual respect, and societal peace. To implement restorative justice way back in 260 BCE, focusing on community healing rather than state-sanctioned revenge, was a monumental leap forward. He realized true growth wasn't about pushing borders outward. It was about elevating the people within them. So what did this new kind of Ashoka Empire growth actually look like in practice? Well, it looked like the ancient world's most aggressive public welfare state. I mean, think about how modern politicians sometimes spend years gridlocked just trying to fund a single highway repair or fill local potholes, right? Ashoka, meanwhile, was building a transcontinental healthcare system. Instead of building military forts, he built medical hospitals for all classes of society. He established veterinary clinics for animals, dug wells for public access, and built extensive rest houses along the major trade routes. He even actively promoted religious pluralism in a highly diverse empire, encouraging different faiths to respect one another. He was growing the living standards and the social fabric of his realm in a way no one had ever seen before.
Section 4. Edicts and Moral Leadership. Now, having a radical new vision of peace is one thing, but how do you actually enforce it without a massive army across an area spanning from Afghanistan to Bangladesh? Ashoka did it through his famous edicts. He had his new laws and ethical principles carved directly into massive rocks and towering polished sandstone pillars. Some of these pillars were literally 40 to 50 feet tall and weighed 50 tons. He strategically engineered and placed this monumental ancient broadcasting system right along important trade routes and near major population centers. And crucially, they were written in local dialects like Prakrit, Greek, and Aramaic. He completely bypassed the bureaucratic middlemen to speak directly to his people, using these edicts as a permanent, highly visible manual for moral governance.
And the content of these edicts is genuinely astonishing to read today. They were light years ahead of their time. Modern historians describe Ashoka's Mauryan Empire as one of the very few instances in world history of a government treating its animals as citizens who are as deserving of its protection. I mean, let that sink in for a second. Animal rights in the BCE era. He abolished the long-standing tradition of imperial hunting for sport. He placed strict limitations on slaying animals for food and actually created state-funded animal sanctuaries. It's an incredibly progressive environmental policy that a lot of modern nations still haven't fully matched. To ensure these policies weren't just idealistic words carved on a rock, Ashoka fundamentally changed his government's entire structure. He created a new class of administrators called the Dhamma Mahamatas, which essentially translates to moral envoys. Think of them like ancient ombudsmen, or, human rights inspectors. These officials were empowered to travel all across the empire and guarantee strict adherence to Dhamma. They inspected local prisons, ensured that local judges prioritized rehabilitation over corporal punishment, and provided grants to the elderly and the poor. They made sure the legal system wasn't just a blunt instrument of state tyranny, but an actual tool to advance justice and protect the vulnerable.
This new approach completely transformed his foreign policy as well. He chose diplomacy over conflict. Instead of sending heavily armed legions across his borders, he sent envoys and Buddhist missionaries to neighboring states. And he didn't just stay local either. He reached way out to the Hellenistic kings of the Mediterranean world, sending emissaries to places like Egypt, Macedonia, and Syria. The very idea that an ancient Indian emperor was sending Buddhist moral envoys to the Greeks is just a fantastic cross-cultural historical fact. He was actively exporting peace, proving that cultural and moral influence could expand an empire's global footprint far, far more effectively than violence ever could.
Section 5. The Emperor's Lasting Legacy. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is comparing it to today. Consider this recent headline regarding the modern Indian government's push to privatize state-run hotels, where a top official argued that the government should exit the hospitality sector completely. It's a standard, widely accepted modern economic view, right? That the state shouldn't be in the business of running rest houses. But fast forward backwards thousands of years ago, and Emperor Ashoka believed the exact opposite. He believed that building public rest houses, planting shade trees along the roads, and caring for tired travelers was a fundamental, unshakable moral obligation of the state itself. It really highlights just how incredibly expansive and deeply empathetic his view of a ruler's duty really was compared to our modern baseline.
So, to bring this all together, Ashoka orchestrated a visionary shift in the very definition of governance. He completely redefined Ashoka empire growth, transforming the role of the monarch from a purely administrative and military enforcer into a moral leader and a caretaker. His reign proved that an empire could achieve unprecedented stability, scale, and prosperity, not by endlessly hoarding resources for perpetual war, but by looking inward, redirecting those vast resources into the social, physical, and spiritual welfare of its people. Which leaves us with an incredibly relevant question for our own time. In today's world, how should we measure the true growth of a nation? Is it strictly driven by GDP, resource extraction, and military might? Or is it measured by the health, the welfare, the environmental stewardship, and the moral character of its citizens? Ashoka made his choice over 2 millennia ago, and his legacy continues to heavily challenge our modern definitions of success. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and I hope this gives you a completely new perspective on what it means to truly grow.